Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana Das. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, and it's a great honor to have you here with me. I'm very, very happy to see you all here. I'm especially happy to see Kamala Radha. It's nice to see you here. And Jessica and Shanna and Sue and Shamala. And Vijay, thank you. Those of you who are already present, and for those of you who are on the way, I welcome you in advance. To those of you who are joining us after the fact, I'm very, very happy that you have taken the time to listen in. And speaking of listening, just to make sure that you're all listening, if you would be kind enough to raise your hands, those of you who are here, to let me know that I can be heard. Very good. I feel validated knowing that I can be heard by you. All right, let's get the rest of our housekeeping out of the way. For those of you who are new to the satsang, you can adjust your audio settings as well as your viewing options up in the upper right-hand corner. No need to worry about your microphone or your video camera. You can see and hear me, whereas I cannot see or hear you. But if you would like to be heard, and I certainly hope that you do, please go ahead and type a comment or a question into the Q&A box. I will keep my eye on that. And please have faith that if I don't answer your question immediately, I'm going to get to it sooner than later. And with that in mind, just a quick look back to our last class. We are getting started in chapter 8. Arjuna had some questions about the specific terminology that Krishna was using towards the end of chapter 7, and so he asked for a review of these terms. Krishna gives his recap and covers 6 specific topics that we have gone over, and then proceeds to give advice for people who are going to die, which is all of us. So, good advice, at least relevant advice, because we're all pretty much in the same boat. I'll talk a little bit about this. Krishna is going to pivot away, or a little away, but not entirely away from this idea of yoga as preparation for death, which is something I bring up from time to time in my yoga classes, just when I really feel like being Mr. Buzzkill. Tonight, Krishna is going to describe how to meditate on the Supreme Person, going into some detail about yoga-misra-bhakti, which is devotional meditation, or devotion in combination with mystic yoga. So up to this point, we have been transitioning from karma yoga to ashtanga yoga, or the mystic path, the eightfold path of mystic yoga, and on into bhakti proper in this now middle section of the Gita. We're going to cover verses 8 through 14, which will describe this interjection of devotion into the process of mystic yoga. And also, as we'll see towards the end of this cluster of verses, single out devotion as the key to easily attain the ultimate goal of yoga. So that's where we're going with this evening. But before we look at the verses, we will chant our invocation mantra. For those of you who are new to transliterated Sanskrit, the dots and dashes that you see above a few of the letters are called diacritics. They give you pronunciation cues. So the dot over the M indicates that one closes one's lips in front, and also the back of the tongue to the roof of the mouth and back, making a round shape with your mouth, as if wrapping your mouth around a little walnut. The bars that you see over two of the A's indicate a long and open ah sound as opposed to a short sound. So I will chant. You can chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Meaning, indicating the absolute reality, I offer my respects to the Supreme Person who is all-pervading. Key verses from last week. The last two verses we covered, verses 6 and 7 of the 8th chapter. O son of Kunti, Arjuna, whatever state of being one remembers at the end of one's life is the state of being they will carry into their next life. For one is certain to attain whatever state of being one's mind is absorbed in. Therefore, you should think of me at all times and fight. With your mind and intelligence offered to me, you will certainly come to me. Of this, there is no doubt. And from here, we will move on to the translation and commentary for our verses this evening. So I'll read through the English translation of each of the verses that we're covering. Then we will go back and look at each verse in detail. So beginning with verse number 8. O son of Pritha, Arjuna, one approaches the Supreme Divine Person by practicing yoga without deviation, keeping one's thoughts continuously focused on Him. One should continuously meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who is the most wise, the most ancient, the perpetual ruler of all, who is smaller than the smallest, and the maintainer of everything, whose form is inconceivable, who is luminous like the sun, and transcendental through the darkness of material nature. Text number 10. One who is filled with pure devotion and propelled by the power of yoga at the time of passing from this body, whose mind is undisturbed and whose life air is held firmly between the eyebrows, will surely attain the transcendental abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 11. I shall now briefly describe to you that which those who are conversant in the Vedas know as the imperishable, which great sages seek to enter by means of renunciation and chastity. Text 12. Closing the gates of the senses, controlling the mind from within the heart, and placing the life air at the top of the head, one remains situated in the state of yogic concentration. Text 13. Anyone who vibrates the singular sound of transcendence, Om, and leaves their body while remembering me, will certainly reach the supreme destination. Text 14. O son of Pritha, for one whose mind is continually immersed in remembrance of me, who is united with me through constant absorption in me, I am easy to obtain. So that takes us through verses 8 through 14. And we are going to chant verse 8 and verse 9. So before we get into the commentary. We'll chant the Sanskrit for this verse. Other things to know with regard to pronunciation here is that a C is always a CH sound. If you want an S sound, you get an S. If you want a K sound, you get a K. In transliterated Sanskrit, a C always indicates a CH sound. So I will chant one line at a time, give you an opportunity to chant that line back. Here we go. Abhyasa yoga yuktena Chaitasa Nanyagamina Paramam Purusham Divyam Yati Parthanuchintayan. The translation again. O son of Pritha, Arjuna, one approaches the Supreme Divine Person by practicing yoga without deviation, keeping one's thoughts continuously focused on Him. So we're going to look at a few key words in the Sanskrit of this verse. The first is abhyasa, meaning practice. This word shows up in the Yoga Sutras, a relatively well-known verse from the Yoga Sutras. And look at that, I just happen to have a copy of the Yoga Sutras handy right here. What a convenience and coincidence. Spectacles. So this word abhyasa shows up in Pada 1, or chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutra, Sutra number 12, Abhyasa Vairagya Vyampan Nirodha. So Abhyasa, practice. Vairagya Vyam, dispassion, renunciation, or non-attachment. Tan, or tat, referring to the states of mind. Nirodha, controlled or restrained. So this word Nirodha also will be significant in the portion of the Gita that we are looking at right now. So this translates as the vritti, or the fluctuations in the mind are stilled by practice and dispassion. Patanjali goes on to describe that from these, practice is the effort to be fixed in concentrating the mind. And practice becomes firmly established when it has been cultivated uninterruptedly and with devotion over a prolonged period of time. So we can see right away that we're going to have parallel instructions as we go back and forth, cross-referencing the description of practice in the Yoga Sutras and the description that Krishna is giving here in the Bhagavad-gita. Patanjali will go on to discuss dispassion is the controlled consciousness of one who is without craving for sense objects. And for a few sutras, he will go through the different states of mind that one acquires through practice, leading up to samadhi, the complete absorption of the mind. In fact, this pada, or chapter, in this particular translation by Edwin Bryant is called meditative absorption. So this is what Patanjali is describing. And then after he describes the end product of practice, he goes back to the details of what the practice actually consists of when he gets up to 23. These previously mentioned state is attainable from devotion to the Lord. Ishvara pranidhanadva. And then he elaborates just a little bit, explaining who the Lord is, or that is to say, describing the various characteristics by which one can know the Lord, or Ishvara, as distinct from all other Purushas, that is to say, persons. Ishvara is described as Purusha Vishesha, categorically different kind of Purusha or person. Untouched by karma, untouched by any particular psychological inclination to be any particular way or to act in any particular way. He is the unsurpassed seed of omniscience, the teacher of the ancients, who is unlimited by time, and then, specifically for our purposes here, tasya vachaka, pranavaha. The name designating him is the mystical syllable Om, and then the recommended practice of meditation. It's the repetition of Om and the contemplation of its meaning, its significance as being synonymous with Ishvara, should be performed. So now we can go back and look a little deeper into this verse and the accompanying, or the verses that follow in Bhagavad-gita. So abhyasa, practicing. Practicing what? Practicing yoga, the control of the senses and of the life air, as we will see, yuktena, by which one becomes linked. Then the next key word, cetasa, the first word of the second line, cetasa nanya-gamina. Cetasa indicates the mind stuff, the combination of the mind and the intelligence. So the engagement, the practice of engaging the mind and intelligence, nanya-gamina, completely focusing on paramam purusham divyam. So paramam, paramount, the supreme, purusham, person, divyam, transcendental. So this would indicate the supreme and transcendental personality of Godhead. Another way of indicating Ishvara, the supreme person. So whereas Ishvara is a more technical philosophical term, paramam purusham divyam indicates very specifically a supreme person, as Patanjali indicated in his phrase, Purusha Vishesha, categorically different person. So the translation again, one approaches the Supreme Divine Person by practicing yoga without deviation, keeping one's thoughts continuously focused on him. So in the subsequent verses, Krishna is going to speak about memory, that is to say, to always remember him. And previously, he spoke about keeping that remembrance active even while engaged in activities such as fighting, which is what he's urging Arjuna to do. So, as we'll see as we move forward, this is a process of reviving spiritual memory. And the process of mystic yoga can be engaged towards that goal of awakening remembrance. Because remember, in Patanjali's Yoga-sūtra, he begins with the proposition that when one brings the chitta, or the ceta, under control, rather than identifying with its fluctuations, then the result is one resides in their true nature, which is to say, how we actually are. And that means awakening our spiritual memory, becoming cognizant once again of the truth of our being. And in our true nature, we are also fully cognizant of Krishna or Ishvara, the Paramatma. We remember that person who occupies the position of the complete whole or the absolute truth, the supreme being. And we recall that relationship. Knowledge of relationships is the first category of knowledge in the Vedic system of knowledge of which the Bhagavad-gita is a part. So, let's go back to our share, and we're going to chant the next verse as well. Now, if you've been following the bouncing ball over our previous classes, you may notice that there are a few extra syllables in this verse, and therefore the cadence will be different. For the most part, the verses in the Bhagavad-gita have 8 syllables per line, and there are a few times where you have an exception, additional syllables. So this is one of those times, and that's one of the reasons why I thought it would be nice to include this verse so that we get a chance to chant something with a slightly different cadence. So once again, the S with a dash, with a apostrophe or an accent mark over it, indicates an SH sound. The dot under an H at the end of a word, at the end of a line, indicates that the vowel that precedes it will be echoed back, as in the last word of the second line here, as opposed to the third word of the fourth line, where the vowel will not be echoed back because the dot under the H does not appear at the end of a word at the end of a line. So, here we go. I will chant. You can chant back. Kavim Puranam Anushasitaram Anor Aniyam Samanusmaridyaha Sarvasya Dhataramachintya Rupam Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parastat All right. The translation here, once again, one should continuously meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who is the most wise. So here are instructions as to more detailed instructions now on how to contemplate the Supreme Person and associations to make with the Supreme Person. So first, the most wise, the most knowledgeable, kavi, one who knows. The most ancient, Puranam. So Purana, like the Puranas. Purana means ancient, or the Puranas indicate ancient stories, old histories. The perpetual ruler of all. Ishvara actually translates as controller, the one who controls everything. So here's another word indicating the ruler or controller. Who is smaller than the smallest or smaller than an atom? Who is the maintainer of everything? Whose form is inconceivable. We're going to come back to this one in just a moment. Who is luminous like the sun and transcendental to the darkness of material nature. Tamasa, darkness. Okay. So these are 9 ways. Some translations would add a 10th way, that the form is inconceivable, but also in general, this person is inconceivable. So that would be 10 different ways to meditate on the Supreme Person. The phrase that I specifically want to focus on is achintya rupam. So the word achintya means inconceivable, beyond our conception, beyond material thought processes, which is to say, you can't reason your way to God. The mind and the intelligence, the cheta or chitta, they're material. They're essentially material objects or machines. They're gizmos made of matter, subtle matter, but still in the category of matter. And our object of meditation is a person who is beyond the precincts of matter, beyond the boundaries of matter. It's just logical that one cannot conceive of something beyond matter when one's instruments are made of matter. They're just not designed to be able to perceive that which is beyond the realm of matter, which is one reason why yoga is a subjective science insofar as it's directly experienced. It's practical, and the practice brings about the direct experience. But that experience comes through the awakening of spiritual senses. And just the understanding comes about when faith in that which is beyond the material senses is awakened. In fact, it is not possible to know that which is beyond the precincts of matter without faith in the existence of something beyond the precincts of matter. If one is convinced that the material world is all there is nothing beyond this material world, then it is logically not possible for one to develop knowledge of that which is beyond the material world. This is not blind faith, but it is faith informed by knowledge coming from authoritative sources of spiritual information, transcendental knowledge, from our own experience, the undeniable reality of our own experience of things, and logic. So 3 different ways that you can make a case for that which is beyond the precincts of matter and is therefore inconceivable from a material standpoint. Now the word rupam, let's go back to the phrase for just a moment. So achintya is inconceivable. Rupam means form. So here we have the idea of a form, a coherent organization of senses, but spiritual senses, not material senses. And once again, because we're talking about something beyond the precincts of matter, achintya rupam means that a form, but an inconceivable form. That's not the same thing as formless. Formless means no form. One might interpret the idea of inconceivable form as meaning, since you can't conceive of it, it doesn't exist. Or that this is somehow synonymous with formless. I disagree. An inconceivable form means, for example, a form that has no limits. Now, one might think that's a contradiction. A form, by definition, has a boundary, and there's an inside and an outside. Well, spiritual form is an unlimited form, or at least the Supreme Person's spiritual form has no limits. There's nothing outside of this form, and yet it has a contour. So the Supreme Person can appear within an environment, and yet that environment is contained within the form of the Supreme Person. That's inconceivable. There's no rational way to understand that within the boundaries of our material mind and senses. There are, I should say, a few interesting corollary verses in a book called the Śrī Īśopaniṣad. And look, I just happen to have a copy right here. Isn't that convenient and a coincidence? And I also have my spectacles. You go for a walk in Vrindavan in India with your spectacles on, people will remind you, spectacles, because there's a good chance you will lose your spectacles to the monkeys, who will take every opportunity to steal them and then hold them ransom for some food. Just in case you're going to Vrindavan in India, remember to bring a case for your spectacles. Mantra 16 in the Śrī Īśopaniṣad translates in this edition as, "O my Lord, O primeval philosopher, wisest and most ancient, maintainer of the universe and the maintainer of everything. O regulating principle, destination of pure devotees, well-wisher of the progenitors of mankind, please remove the effulgence of your transcendental rays so that I can see your form of bliss." So here, this correlates to who is luminous like the sun. And yet, that light is not all there is. That light is emanating from the form, the inconceivable spiritual form of the Supreme Person. And here we have basically a prayer from a devotee of the Supreme Person who wishes for this effulgence, for this glow to subside so that they are able to see with their own spiritual eyes this inconceivable form. Then in the next mantra from the Īśopaniṣad, "Let this temporary body be burnt to ashes, and let the air of life be merged with the totality of air. Now, O my Lord, please remember all my sacrifices, and because you are the ultimate beneficiary, please remember all that I have done for you." So this harkens back to both sacrifices spoken of earlier in the Gita, in the section on karma yoga, and the Ashtanga yoga process of merging the life, the air of life into the totality of air. And then finally, bhakti or devotion, depending on the Supreme Person upon whom this person is meditating, to help them in their desire to be united with that same Supreme Person. And then finally, the last or 18th mantra of the Īśopaniṣad, "O my Lord, as powerful as fire, O omnipotent one, now I offer you all obeisances, falling on the ground at your feet." Interesting. So the inconceivable form includes feet that you can fall on the ground at. "O my Lord, please lead me on the right path to reach you. And since you know all that I have done in the past, please free me from the reactions my past actions so that there will be no hindrance to my progress. So the idea here is that one can petition the Supreme Person to help one make advancement on the path of yoga. And this is one of the elements of bhakti, which is the essential element in all of the other processes of yoga, as we will see as we continue with the rest of our verses. But first, I just want to take a quick time out to see if anyone has any questions. If you have any questions or comments about what we've covered so far, please go ahead and pop your questions and comments into the Q&A box, and I will look for them. And as I anxiously await any questions you may have, I will continue with our verses and commentary. So now we're up to verse 10. The translation again: one who is filled with pure devotion and propelled by the power of yoga at the time of passing from this body, whose mind is undisturbed and whose life air is held firmly between the eyebrows, will surely attain the transcendental abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in order to release the life force in a yogic or controlled fashion, one first must gain control over the life force in order to fix it in a position that is favorable for the departure of the soul from the physical body. This is a pretty wild idea. The idea that one can gain control by a mechanical process of one's own life force and fix it in a particular spot in order to facilitate basically a planned ejection. You know, it's like a pilot in a jet fighter who hits the eject button, the roof flies off, and you exit the aircraft. That's a pretty wild idea, and probably not the easiest thing to do. We have a question. The question is, in which verse does Krishna give Arjuna divine eyes in order to see him, in quotes? Thank you very much for your question. This verse is going to come up soon in the 11th chapter, which many people consider the dramatic crescendo of the Bhagavad-gita, the revelation of the universal form. By that point, Arjuna will have his doubts dispelled, and he will begin to ask faith-based questions. And one of them is actually a request. He requests Krishna to reveal how he is the Supreme Person, how he actually becomes the universe. And Krishna describes this form and then says, but in order for you to see it, I need to give you divine eyes so that you will actually be able to see this form of mine. And then that divine vision is granted, and Arjuna can see that which others cannot see. And that form is described throughout the middle of the 11th chapter. I'll get you the exact verse. Verses, over the course of text 5 through 8. 8 specifically, he says, here you go, behold my mystic opulence, I give you these divine eyes. But he rolls into it starting from verse 5 and concluding in verse 8 in the 11th chapter. So we'll be working up to that through these chapters that are specifically about devotional yoga. So in these verses, I trust that satisfactorily answers your question. And as we move through these verses, texts 10, 11, 12, and 13, Krishna is now starting to speak of the practice of Sat-chakra yoga, or the yoga of control of the life force or the energy centers, or moving the life force through the energy centers of the body. In modern yoga practice, one can make correlations between the different physical poses, the asanas, and a energy center or chakra, wheel, literally, traffic circle. Consider it like an energy traffic circle. So different poses are associated with these different energy centers. Standing poses with your base or root chakra, hip opening poses with the next chakra up in your lower abdomen, twisting poses with your midsection, back bends or heart openers, as they are colloquially known, for your heart chakra and also for your throat chakra. Poses that activate your third eye center and your Sahasrara chakra all the way at the crown of your head. So that's one way to think about how your food body, your external body, is connected through your breath to the energy body, the flow of life force in different directions in your body, and specifically to the energy centers or energy traffic circles that we work to balance in our yoga practice and then gain control of in order to move the life force up the ladder of your chakras, so to speak. So here, Krishna is speaking about advanced chakra yoga, where the yogi has mastered the techniques of controlling the life force and fixing that life force at their third eye center. And he speaks about one whose mind is undisturbed at the time of passing from this body. This is a description of someone who is steady in their yoga practice over a long period of time and has arrived at a point of such discernment between pure consciousness or the spiritual person and the physical body that the exit of the person from the physical body is no more traumatic than taking off your coat when you walk in from outside on a cold day, or changing your sweater. And this is, of course, not an easy thing to do. Normally, our consciousness is disrupted by something as simple as stubbing one's toe or catching a cold. We don't normally pay attention to our bodies until something goes wrong with it, and then we're completely distracted by whatever ails us. So here, the most traumatic of possible events, the departure from one's physical body, is described as being an event that does not disturb the one who is leaving. So this is, once again, how yoga is preparation for leaving one's body, for death. And therefore, one is encouraged to practice yoga while our bodies are relatively healthy and our minds relatively undisturbed, because later in life, this will just prove to be more and more difficult. Moving on to the 11th verse of the 8th chapter. Translation again, I shall now briefly describe to you that which those who are conversant in the Vedas know as the imperishable. So this imperishable is a word for Brahman, the ultimate transcendence or that state of being characterized by eternality, that which does not change, which great sages seek to enter by means of renunciation and chastity, or brahmacharya, celibacy. So here Krishna is about to describe what's required of a sage or a yogi who is engaged in the process of mystic yoga for the sake of realizing Brahman, or merging into the undifferentiated oneness of being. So Arjuna, being a warrior and not a yogi, might not know what the practice of Satchakra yoga entails. And one of Krishna's many names is Yogeshvara. Ishvara, master, yoga, the master of yoga. Arjuna has proposed that instead of fighting, maybe he should just go off to the woods and become a renunciate. And now Krishna is describing to him, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, well, here's more about what's involved with that. And we'll see if you like this idea. So the syllable Om in particular is the mantra of those who seek to merge into Brahman, or who have an impersonal conception of the ultimate truth, and therefore want to attain that state of being beyond material existence, which has no name, form, quality, activity, no sense of relationship with anything. And in order to do that, and Krishna will come back to this later, the degree of difficulty involved in doing this, one has to withdraw the senses from their sense objects, maintain strict celibacy, the containment of all of one's life force. And this is very, very difficult in modern society to live in this way. Very, very few people can even consider realistically this sort of lifestyle. It's something that really only works if you start practicing this kind of yoga very, very early in one's life. The traditional system is the student goes to live with the guru and then practices not only to acquire knowledge, but also to develop character and control over the mind in such a way so that this sort of thing becomes possible. It's not particularly practical in this day and age. The next verse elaborates on this process of Satchakra yoga, closing the gates of the senses. So Krishna is referring back now to an earlier verse in the 5th chapter, the 13th verse of the 5th chapter, where he describes the physical body as the city of 9 gates. That is to say, all the different openings through which things come and go with the body. So eyes, ears, nose, mouth, etc. So this is describing now pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses from the sense objects for the sake of turning inward. And Krishna continues, controlling the mind from within the heart. So this is actually really interesting. There are 2 things going on here. One is, once again, the idea of devotion. Devotion is not something that springs from the mind. It's something that springs from the heart. And one's motivation is strong when one feels a sense of devotion. Devotion to who or what? Devotion to the person who is residing within our hearts, the Paramatma, the localized form of the Supreme Person. So this works 2 ways. One's own devotion to the Supreme Person and surrendering, as we heard from the verses in the Śrī Īśopaniṣad, to that Supreme Person within the heart as a request for assistance on the path of yoga. So In two ways, we find the idea of controlling the mind from the heart, working from the standpoint of our motivation and our supplication. And placing the life air at the top of the head, once again, the mechanical process of moving the life force to the highest location here. Now, the top of the head is actually the crown chakra, the Sahasrara chakra, the gateway to transcendence. One remains situated in the state of yogic concentration. So in order to achieve this level of mystic perfection, one has to completely turn inwards and engage in sustained concentration. Text 13, anyone who vibrates the singular sound of transcendence, Om, and leaves their body while remembering me, will certainly reach the supreme destination. So here we see how Brahman and Paramatma and Krishna himself are not different. So remember, we have three aspects of the same one absolute truth. Brahman, the undifferentiated oneness of being, the spiritual energy of which all things are made. Paramatma, the localized aspect of the omniscient Lord within the heart of all beings and placed situated within each atomic particle. And then Krishna himself, the form, the inconceivable form that contains everything and yet is within an environment. And in this case, the environment being entering into the material world that is made of his own energy for the sake of having this conversation with Arjuna, and by extension, giving us information about the true nature of ourselves, of the world, and our relationship with Krishna. And finally, the 14th verse, and we're going to come back and take a close look at this verse. Okay. I will chant, and you can chant back. Ananya cheta satatam yo mam smariti nityashaha tasyaham sulabhat bharata nitya yuktasya yoginaha. The phrase here that I'd like to focus on for just a moment is ananya cheta satatam. The translation once again, O son of Pritha, Arjuna, for one whose mind is continually immersed in remembrance of me, who is united with me through constant absorption in me, I am easy to obtain. So ananya cheta satatam. Satatam indicating always, sat, eternality, so always. Cheta, or the chitta, the mind, ananya, continually immersed. So the emphasis here is on the continuity. One whose mind is continually, perpetually immersed in remembrance, mam, of me, smariti, indicating always remembering me. Krishna will come back to this idea and phrase it a little differently later in the Gita. One who's united with me, yukta, yuktasya, through constant absorption, I am easy to obtain. So this now is making a distinction between the yogi who is looking for liberation and the yogi who is simply focused entirely not on their own ulterior motive, but on Krishna. Another meaning of ananya chetasam is without other motivation. That is to say, thinking of Krishna for the sake of thinking of Krishna, which is pure devotion. Pure devotion in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition of Bhakti Yoga is defined as devotional service that is unmotivated by a desire for any material result or liberation from the material world, but simply love offered for love's sake, or acts of love that are motivated by love and nothing else. So this verse specifically describes the final destination attained by someone who is absorbed in bhakti. So bhakti informs the other practices of yoga, but bhakti also stands alone by itself. And it is by this method of pure devotion that Krishna says, I'm easily obtained. So even if one is not able to mechanically bring the life force up to the top of the head and eject from one's body at the time of their choosing, the power of mystic yoga, if one is simply able to fix one's mind on Krishna, on the Supreme Being, without any deviation, without any ulterior motive, then Krishna, who has described himself as being the ultimate goal, is easily obtained. So now it's just a question of which are you interested in? Are you interested in merging into the impersonal aspect of Brahman? Are you interested in knowing the Supreme Person within the heart? Or are you interested in developing a relationship based on love between yourself and the Supreme Person? That's a rhetorical question, but if you have an actual question that you would like me to address, please go ahead and pop it into the Q&A. Now is a really good time to ask a question or make a comment about any of the verses that we've covered this evening. And in case you're wondering what those verses were, well, I'm going to tell you. Tonight's class on Chapter 8, the Yoga of Attaining the Supreme, we covered how to meditate on the Supreme Person. We discussed Yoga-misra-bhakti, which is devotional meditation in combination with mystic yoga, and we made a distinction in this last verse between mystic yoga that has some motivation to it, the desire for liberation, and yoga that has no motivation, pure bhakti, bhakti that is not compromised in any way by an ulterior motive for material gain or liberation from material life. We covered verses 8 through 14. So if you have any questions, ask them now. And if you have questions later, which if you're listening to this means now, then send those questions to me after the fact. You can find me at Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. And since we have been on the topic of meditation and getting into a immersive trance of meditation, we will continue with other elements of knowledge about this process of attaining the Supreme. The Gita's calculations of time and space coming up in our next class. We will also discuss the transmigration of souls on a cosmic scale, not just on an individual basis, but how it looks in the big picture. And Krishna will describe a one-way trip to the Supreme destination. We will cover verses 15 through 22. If you would like to get a head start on a trip on a cosmic scale, I'd just like to remind you that I have a set of meditations on my website that you can download under the meditations navigation, main navigation on my website. And if you're a yoga teacher and you are interested in taking your students on a trip of this kind, then I also have meditation scripts that you can avail yourself to as well. So there you go. There's my commercial for the evening. And that's it for this evening. Oh, hold on. Wait a minute. There's more. Okay. From Vijay, I mentioned, you mentioned Patanjali and Gita similarities. Did Patanjali copy the Gita or the other way around? Very good question. I think the answer is none of the above. There was no plagiarism involved or stealth. The Gita, the speaking of the Gita, from the standpoint of the historical timeline, is understood to precede the composition of the Yoga-sūtras by Patanjali, whoever Patanjali was. There's considerable debate as to whether Patanjali is a person or a title that belonged to many people. The Yoga-sūtras themselves refer to the yoga system it describes as previously existing, which is to say this is a systematic presentation of a pre-existing science. And the evidence of its pre-existence appears in, among other places, the Bhagavad-gita, where Krishna is describing, in different words, that very same system. So the system of yoga that we find in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is understood to precede the sutras. It's not invented by the sutras. It doesn't originate with the Yoga Sutras. And there is no claim to that effect. But rather, Patanjali is now systematically describing this process of yoga based on the same philosophical foundation that we find in the Bhagavad-gita, which is the discernment between spirit and matter, the distinction between the self and the not self. So that's your chronology. Gita comes first, then Yoga Sutras, and the Yoga Sutras are describing the same system of yoga that Krishna is describing in this area of the Bhagavad-gita. Both arise from the same tradition of knowledge, the Vedic tradition. So we find that in the philosophical systems arising from the Indian subcontinent, there are generally it's generally understood that there are 6, and the 3 that are related are Sankhya, the yoga of the science of discernment between spirit and matter, and the enumeration of material elements, Vedanta, or the ultimate end of knowledge, and yoga, the science of practice. So those things go together. You're very welcome. My pleasure. I'm glad I was able to receive your questions. So thank you for asking. And all other questions after the fact, I hope will land in my email box soon. I thank you all very, very much for choosing to spend your time with me and for your engagement in the subject matter of the Bhagavad-gita. I look forward to seeing you all in our next class. I hope your new year is off to a great start, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.